today we're doing a walkthrough of browser automation actions in Power Automate Desktop. So I'm going to kick this off so you can watch it while I talk. I tried to fit everything on the screen. We'll see how successful I was. So what this is doing is it is generating reports from a website based off of kind of like a hit list in Excel. So it's got a list of the things that it's going through and pulling, and it's using some information in that spreadsheet in the form when it submits the settings to generate. So based on a ID or selecting something from a drop down, that kind of thing. And something you want to think about before you build something like this is whether or not you have direct access to the data that these reports are based on, because it's always better to, say, connect to a database source in Power BI and make a report off of it there and just schedule refresh on it than it is to do automation that goes through and clicks all of the buttons it needs in order to export the thing from the browser. However, sometimes you don't have that. So you did maybe notice that there was an error message on the browser window. That's fine. It is still exporting the report. It's functioning. The automation browser is a little bit wonky sometimes. So we're going to go through exactly how to build this step by step. And you can see that it is both saving the file to, I'm pointing at my screen like you can see what I'm pointing at, but it's downloading the file to a folder. That folder is syncing to SharePoint. And it is then emailing the file using Outlook. And all of these actions are included for essentially for free. This tool comes with Windows. The thing that is costly when you start using this is scheduling. So if you wanted to schedule these activities versus pushing the play button and having them run, those are two different licensing categories, basically. So let's go through how to build this. So to start with, I've got an Excel file here. This is essentially going to be the list of things we're going to iterate over when we're generating exports in the browser. So I have a few fields here. You probably don't need all of these, but I use them in the flow, so that's why they're included. So we have an ID column, so it's like the client ID. You can use this when you're filling out the form to, say, search for something by ID. Have the client name. So these aren't real clients, by the way. This is a public website that I'm running this on just as an example. The name I use in the file name, so you can insert that into the file name when it downloads so that it is named systematically. And the report column here is used to select a report from a drop-down menu to choose which report we're exporting. And then the email to is what it uses when it sends the email. And you can separate multiple email addresses with a semicolon, and that way it will send to each of the people in that list. And you want to insert a table around this data, so you just select it and then go to the insert menu and then click on table here and it'll add a table. All right, so in our new flow, the first thing we need to do is to open Excel. So we're going to search for the word Excel. We get a bunch of Excel actions here. So launch Excel. And when we launch Excel, we want to open the following document and then choose the file we have that has the list of actions we want to perform. And click on Save. And now we need to get the data out of the Excel file. So that is read from Excel worksheet. So read from Excel worksheet, what you can do with that is set it to retrieve value of named cells. We'll let you use the name of your table that you inserted around your data and call only that data. So that would be, if you haven't changed the name of it, it'll always default to table 1. And it saves that data into a variable called Excel data. So we're going to save that. And now we need to open a browser. So for the browser actions, in this case, we are going to exclusively use the Launch New Internet Explorer. And bear with me for a second. I know it's Internet Explorer, it's old news, whatever. The reason we need to use Internet Explorer is because it has this launch mode of Launch Automation Browser. And that is important because it lets us use certain actions that we can't use with the other browsers. And we're going to need that for the downloading the file because we want to perform actions on the download. So we need that. And then give it the URL. And for the windowed state for Internet Explorer specifically, it opens in a teeny tiny window that you can't see anything in. So I like to set it to maximized. And this would be the point where if you need to log into the site that you're using, you can record actions for that. So mine doesn't. Mine is a public website, but you can use the same technique that I show in the later part of this video to fill out form fields. And it does have a special action for filling in passwords that's encrypted. So that's cool. You'll notice I just played the flow, and that is to open the automation browser. So we want to be able to refer to things in the automation browser. So we need to open it in order to do that. So I just ran it to get it to open. And I'm just going to close the Excel file, zoom in a little bit. Okay, so now we need to add a loop. So we are going to for each loop. So that means for each of the rows in our Excel spreadsheet, we are going to perform actions. So for the value to iterate, we just select our data that we pulled from Excel. So that is going to be Excel data here, and it's going to automatically store that into current item. So what that does is it takes each row in the Excel spreadsheet and does actions on each row, and it stores all of that information about that row, so all of the rest of the columns in current item, which means you can refer to those columns for that specific row in your actions, which is cool. All right, so we've got our report type drop down here. Our flow is going to need to select something from this menu for each of the rows. So that was that third column in the Excel spreadsheet, if you recall. So this one here is telling us what value to select in that drop-down menu. So to refer to that, what we do is under the browser automation category here. I open this up, there is a whole section for web form filling, and it's got a set drop-down list value on a web page. So that's going to set a drop-down list option. And for the UI elements, this is asking what do you want it to select from. So we need to tell it to use that drop-down menu. So to do that, we just click on and that's going to open up this UI element picker menu. So you hold down Control and click on the thing you want it to select from, and then it stores it into the UI element drop-down here. So instead of clear all options, we want it to select something, right? So we're going to tell it select options by name. You can also do by index. So if something is always in the same position, you can give it the position instead of the actual name of the option. So for our option name, we're going to get that from our Excel data. So we're going to refer to the variable that our Excel data is stored in. So I'm going to do % current item, which is our current item, and then I'm going to give it the column position that that data was in. So it was in the third column. That's actually position 2 because we're using computer speak here, and computers start at 0. And we're going to put that in square brackets and then close our %. So variables in Power Automate Desktop always are referred to by the % on each end of them. That's how it knows that you're talking about a variable. So this is going to take whatever is in that column and put it in the drop-down menu. So we can save that. So I'm going to actually do that over here so that we can get the actions we need to perform next. So one of the 2 reports I was going to use is this one, so call report. So since I decided to make this more interesting and pull from a couple of different reports for our actions, we need either a if or a switch. So those are under conditionals here. We're going to do case and switch. So we're going to do switch first, and the value to check is going to be that same column in the Excel spreadsheet. So we're going to say current item, position 2, or actually 3 if you're human. And then we need to add our cases. So we're going to say if it is this, then do these things. If it is that, then do those other things. So we're going to say is equal to, and then our value was call report, and save. So if the report type is call report, we need to fill in some fields. So that would be this unique identifier, and that's going to be from our Excel file also. And then we need to select some dates because that's a required field. So for the report date, if I open up this drop-down menu, you'll notice that the dates are always sorted. So the newest dates are always on top. So if I'm doing this on some periodic basis, what I probably want is to refer to these by the position. So like say this particular report doesn't seem to populate until a couple of them down. So I'm going to do like say this one here. So position 3, it's number 4, but position 3 because we're talking to a computer. So I want position 3. So we're going to say select an item from a drop down. So that's set drop down value, UI element, add UI element, and we're going to control click on that drop down menu, and it created it, but it didn't auto select it this time because it's buggy. You'll notice that it says the date in here. We're going to go and look at that UI element to make sure that it's selecting the right thing because this date is going to change, right? And we want it to select options by index and give it position, say position 3. Okay, so if I want to go look at this UI element to see what it's doing, I can select the UI elements from the sidebar over here, and they're all listed out. So you can rename these. I highly recommend renaming them, especially if they have kind of bogus names. So this one I could call report select date. And you can see what these actually are if you go into the edit menu. So you get a preview of the selector that it's using here. So this looks okay. And then you can also see the tree of items that it is under here. So I'm just going to close this. And now we need to set the unique identifier field in the form. So we're going to use this populate text field on a web page. And for UI element, we can do, and actually want this text box right here. So I'm going to control click it. And it didn't select it again. So let's go ahead and select that. This one here is always going to add it last. So that's how you know which one it is. And for text, we're going to give it our ID column. So that was %current item. And that was the first column. So that's position 0. Click OK. And now we need one more action to click the button. So we want this click link on web page because the button that we're clicking isn't the download file button. We're going to get to that one in a little bit. All right. So for our UI element, click on add UI element again, and it really likes to minimize everything when it does this. Super awesome. So we're going to control click this generate button up here, and it didn't auto select it. So I'm going to select menu and click save. Now, if I go and click that over here, I should probably put an ID in the box so that it doesn't fail. Let's see, let's pick one of these. So I'm just moving this along, click on generate. So this website is really weird in the automation browser. It does this thing where it tries to download the web page when I click on the generate button, which it's really not the file that we want. That's the ASPX page, not the file. We want the buttons up here to download the file. So what we need to do is close this window. And the easiest way to do that, since you'll see the cancel button is highlighted here. This is one of these like weird Power Automate desktop tricks that you kind of run into occasionally. Sending keys is a really good way to work around any kind of issues you're having when you're not sure how to get Power Automate Desktop to select the thing you want. So what we're going to do is, since this cancel is already selected here, we're just going to send keys to the keyboard and use the enter button to close this window. So I'm going to search for send keys in the menu over here and just drop it right here. And we're going to go to the miscellaneous menu and it's send the enter button to the foreground window. And the thing with all of these actions is we need to start adding some pauses and some waits in here, because if these fire right away when the page loads, they're going to fail because the thing that they're trying to say click on doesn't exist on the page yet because it's still loading. So anytime you are opening a new page in a browser, you need to add a wait action before the first thing that you do with stuff on that page. So knowing what I know about how this flow goes, I'm going to move this launch Internet Explorer action into the for each loop, and we're going to open and close the browser each time. This is only because I had a really hard time getting the flow to recognize the button actions in the loop. So when it would use the back button to go back in the browser, suddenly it couldn't find any of the components anymore. So I'm just going to close and reopen the browser on the loops to try and avoid that. So we're going to launch the browser there, and then we're going to wait. So we're going to wait for page content. We're going to wait for the drop down that we're going to click on to exist on the page. That's pretty straightforward, right? So we just select our UI element that we want to wait for. So that's this select report type. And if you want to, you can have it fail with a timeout error if it times out, but I don't think that's going to happen here. So usually that is more of a thing for janky websites that sometimes never load. You want a timeout error for that. So there's our wait for that one. When we select the report type, it opens another new page. So we need to add a wait action before it is setting the drop down items here. So we can add a wait for page content and then wait for it to contain the date selector before we select the date. And we don't need to add a wait for the rest of these because by that point the page will have loaded. And now we need to add one more wait for the send keys action here because that this clicking the generate button also opens a new window. So for this one, we can't necessarily wait for that random weird pop-up window because that's not actually part of the web page. So I'm just going to give it a time. So there's a wait action that for some reason doesn't show up until you open this particular menu. The rest of them expanded by default. This one didn't. So for flow control, wait, and you just give it a number of seconds. So I'm going to say maybe 3 seconds, just in case. That's probably more than we need, but whatever. So that's going to close this little pop-up window. And then what we need is the download file. So click a download link on a web page. So this is the one where it's possible to download the file by just clicking the link. However, if you do that, it's going to go into your downloads folder and then you can't do anything else with it. So we're going to use this click a download link on the web page because that will store the information about the file in a variable and we can refer to it later. So for the UI element, we just add our UI element. So I'm going to do the PDF for funsies here. So we're going to control click that. And for the destination folder, we need to give it a path that we want to put the file in. And what I've done is synced a document library from SharePoint, and we can use that as our destination folder so that anything that we put in that folder gets synced to SharePoint. So if you're not familiar, essentially in any SharePoint library, there is a sync button right here. If you sync it, it'll make a folder on your computer under whatever your tenant name is, and then this will be the site name, and then you can grab the path. So if I open up this folder, click on the address bar up here, I can copy this and use this for the path. And actually what I'm going to do instead of pasting this in directly is I'm going to put it in a variable because we're going to refer to it more than once. And that way we can change it in one place and it'll be updated everywhere we're using it down the road. So I'm going to save this, and it's kind of angry with me. That's okay. So I'm going to do a set variable, and I'm going to put this at the beginning of the flow. We're going to call this file download path. And for the value, I'm just going to paste in that path that I copied earlier. And now we can refer to that down here in this step. So we just go to the little X icon and select our file download path. Click on save, and then we're going to close the browser. And again, you don't always have to close the browser every time. I just found that that worked better in this particular case. And we don't have to do any configuration here, just save it. And now if I want to rename that file, if I search for the word rename in the actions, there's a rename files action. And I'm actually going to put that outside of the case statement because I want to do this for both kinds of files. For files to rename, just select from the variables your downloaded file variable. So that's the one that was generated by the click download link on a web page action. And you've got some options for how you rename it. In this case, we're just going to set a new name. And for the new file name, I'm going to use the name of our client. So that was %current item. That was the second column. So that's position 1. So that's our client name. And then I could do like a space or a hyphen or something like that, or maybe an underscore. I'll do an underscore. And then our report type would go nicely here. So that is %current item. And then I think that was the third column. Was it the third column? Yeah, so that's 2. So position 2. So what this is going to do is it's going to do client name underscore report name as the file name. You could put the date in here too if you want. If you search actions, there's an action for the date, but the date's going to be in the created date for the file in SharePoint. So I feel like that's kind of unnecessary. You can choose whether or not you keep the extension. We want to keep the extension, and then that'll make a new variable here called renamed files. So next I'm just going to add our second case statement here for our other type of report that we're generating. So this one was called, what's it? Peer group average report. I'm just going to copy this. All right, so I'm going to run this just so we can get the automation browser open and make sure everything is working. It's a good idea to save these frequently, by the way, because it doesn't seem to have an autosave functionality. And I like to add a breakpoint. So maybe like right here. So the breakpoint is going to stop it from continuing the loop. It's just going to loop one time for our testing because we don't want it to keep going. All right. So it's coming up with an error, but that's because we haven't added the actions for the peer group average report yet. That's fine. So let's do those. It's trying to rename a file that doesn't exist. So for a peer group average report, I actually don't need to set either of these drop downs. I can just click on generate, and you could select in the same way that we did before a different date frame for this using the set drop down list value on web page action. So all I need to do here is click on generate. So by the way, you can add UI elements from the UI elements pane over here. You don't have to do it through the action. So I'm going to do that just as an example. And I'm going to rename this so we know which one this is. Okay, so if I click this, what does this do? It opens this page. Okay, so we just want the click a link. So click a link on a web page. Don't use the click a UI element in a window. We want the link on a web page. Select our UI element. That was this one. And we also need to add a pause in here because selecting that type of report loaded a new page. So I'm going to add a wait for web page content. I'm going to wait for that UI element that we are clicking on to load. All right, so this new window that opened has a download button here. So we need to add an action to click on that. And that one is something that'll actually download the file. So we want the download option here, the download link on a web page. And this one is also going to need a pause. So we're going to add that in a second. For our UI element, add it the same way. Control click that download button, and destination folder, just give it the variable we created. And for the variables produced, I don't want this to make a second variable. I want to reuse our existing variable because it's only ever going to set one of these for every loop. So we're just going to take that 2 out of there. We need another wait. So we're going to wait for the download button. This one. Okay. All right. So for Outlook, we have 2 groups of actions. We have this one, which is the desktop version of Outlook on your computer. And we have the Microsoft 365 Outlook actions here. These ones are going to be premium, come with additional licensing costs, so I'm going to use this one. I'm going to put this at the top of the flow, right under the Launch Excel. It doesn't require any kind of settings. It's the email that we have to configure. So for the email, we're going to use a send email message through Outlook, and we're going to put that right below the rename file step. And this one requires you to enter an account. It's got to be something that you are logged into in Outlook, right? And if you want to, you can opt to send it from another mailbox. For the 2, we're going to get this from our Excel data. So %sign current item position 3, I think it was. And for the subject, you can put whatever you want in here. This is able to reference your Excel data. So you could put the report name in here. So we could call this quarterly. This is going to be the report name here. Same thing for the email body. You can refer to the columns in your Excel spreadsheet here too. This is my very creative, lengthy email body. And for attachments, this is the important part. So you need to go to the select variable here and select your renamed file. So that's this one, because that's the version we want to send, right? All right, so click on save. Let's see how we did. I'm going to turn off this breakpoint. I'm going to move this close web browser step to outside of the switch so that it works on both. And let's go ahead and run this. It is completely normal for your flows to have errors the first time that you run them, by the way, so please don't get discouraged by that if it happens. Troubleshooting is part of the process for sure. You'll notice that it's typing out the path in the file name field in order to save it to a specific location. Find that kind of strange, but that's how it works. All right, and that navigation to web page canceled is fine. That's from closing that little pop-up. It's still downloading the files. And you can see the emails coming through too here. All right, so this looks successful.